Good morning. It's Joe Waxman, and I wanted to make a video this morning about transcending sadness. This is a big topic, but it's been on my mind for a while that I wanted to try and get this out and explain it how I see it. I think it's very important because it's something that a lot of people could use. And well, I want to go give it some background. So I'm going to start at the beginning of my life, early years of my life, to shed some light on this topic as to why I'm talking about this. And as usual, I have my light avatar there, aiding me, helping me out. All right. When I was young, I had, I would space out all the time, very often. I remember this clearly. I even earned a nickname, Spaceman, because my consciousness did not really want to be here in this body. It liked to just kind of spread out, and I would just stare off into space. And I remember it, the feeling, it was very undifferentiated, kind of crystalline, like if you can imagine like crystals and bells and light shows and that sort of thing that occupied my whole sense of being. Natively, my conscious is very attuned to spirit, to finer, higher vibrations. This was very common for me, and it changed as I got older, especially after around age 10, when my brother was killed by a train. A train hit and killed my brother, and he was 12 and I was 10, and that was very traumatizing. It scared me because, I had no real experience of that. For a child who's only 10 to come close to death is what it felt like, because he was my brother, my full blood brother. I was very close to him. I lived with him. We fought a lot, but we were very close. And for him to die made me feel like, maybe I was next. Maybe I could die. And it was just this incredible shock to my system that brought up just an unimaginable amount of fear that my system could not handle. And that much fear gets trapped in the nervous system, and it causes problems. That's what trauma is, and that's the underlying cause of pretty much, as far as I know, I would say most mental illnesses. Maybe there's some other reasons, biological, karmic, from past lives, whatnot. But most mental illnesses, mental health issues come from childhood trauma. So I didn't receive any help for this, and there was no knowledge really from my parents or from anywhere else about things like this at that time. And I think even today that our awareness as a society of trauma is still growing. We're not really there yet. We don't really understand as a society the effects of trauma, of mental health. There's still so much room to grow. And I've seen that again and again and again. It's, the modern mental health world, this is a whole other topic, but the modern mental health world is really kind of taken over by big pharma, pharmaceuticals, whenever anyone has like a real issue, the main go-to is these really heavy, intense pharmaceutical drugs that don't really help. They don't help the issue. They just compound it and make it worse. And I have direct experience with that, which I'll get to. But I never went down that route. In fact, I grew up after that thinking I was fine, which was wrong. I was not fine. I had deep trauma that I was unaware of. But I went on, and it came out in various ways. I acted out. I rebelled. I remember, taking on a different kind of persona, one that sort of expressed the trauma. It was very dark, very rebellious, very, masking hidden pain. Um, but anyway, life went on, and I was a bad kid, not bad. I wasn't bad, but like I took on that persona, that image, dressing all crazy into punk rock and metal, and like 12, 10 or 10, like 10 or 11 ear piercings and crazy hair and all that. That was all based in trauma, most of it. Drinking, drugs, alcohol, all that. And see, around college, the trauma really started to come out, and I developed severe anxiety, and I couldn't function well anymore socially. The older I got from that trauma, which traps itself around age 10, that's why people will have, you can see the age where the trauma happens, because the person will be sort of trapped in that age, and that's where, like multiple personalities come from, like severe trauma repeatedly, and it expresses itself differently. But I was acutely, over time, I became acutely aware that part of myself was just not growing. It was trapped at a certain age, a 10-year-old, and that's very unhealthy. And the older you get, the more pronounced it becomes. Like you can't walk around with part of yourself being age 10 in an adult world. It's just it doesn't work. The discrepancy is too great. So, and then other parts overcompensate. I became much more hyper intellectual as I grew, because I was, the parts that were unaffected were trying to compensate. So I became very intellectual, very mental. But my anxiety became a problem. Like whenever I had to speak in front of people, my heart would just beat a mile a minute, and it was like a vacuum. Like it would like just suck up all the energy, and like I could hardly speak. Obviously, I can speak now, and sometimes I still have, residual anxiety or nervousness when I feel like I'm being put on the spot too much. That'll still come up, but it's 95% gone. I'd say 95% gone. But anyway, so that started to point me to the awareness that, something wasn't right. Like, why did I have so much anxiety, whereas everyone else was okay? And I was like, my subconscious, like I kind of knew, like if you had, put me under hypnosis, I would have been like, talking about, that painful situation with my brother dying. But I probably didn't want to admit that to myself, a lot of pride, ego, and I had ambitions, and I just wanted to be, normal and healthy enough to pursue my ambitions, and I didn't want to admit anything was wrong with me, so that carried on. Anyway, life became more challenging, because this was like a ball and chain. It's like dragging around this huge heavy weight with you everywhere if you're trying to lead a normal life, ignoring that much trauma. Normally what people would do, as far as I know, there's probably many different ways this can go, but either with drugs or alcohol, or just whatever shape it takes. What has to happen when you're carrying around a lot of trauma is you have to cover it up. You have to dull it. And that can take the form of alcohol, drugs, fatty foods and sugars, just excess in general, and very, very wide swings, like a lot of like very dense type of food and energy, and they're very expansive, and it creates a lot of numbness and protection. So the person doesn't feel that pain. You can't walk around in society feeling that much pain unless you're consciously working with it, unless you're consciously trying to get underneath it. That's when you can sort of dig down and uncover the layers, but that comes later. So I was drinking a lot, and also I was trying to, practice macrobiotics, but that was macrobiotics meaning like food awareness, like eating healthy and eating clean. But that's the problem, because that sort of cleans you out and opens you up. So in other words, life was very painful. Life was very difficult when I was not focusing, when I was not making myself aware of that and focusing on that consciously. By chance, I met my teacher, who became my teacher, Vanessa Stone, who helped me a lot with these things around age 28, right before my Saturn return. Vanessa is a wonderful humanitarian, highly evolved being, great teacher, and just a wonderful, wonderful human being. She taught me a lot, and she helped me to turn inward and look at these things much more successfully than I had. I had a spiritual practice before, but it was very unguided. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I was just sort of messing around with things and like paying attention to my consciousness, because that's naturally where I come from. That's naturally where my consciousness goes to, right? It started before then. I have a natural inclination to pay attention to my consciousness. But she guided me, she helped me, and she really saw me. She saw my pain and how much, how much I was suffering at that time. And I didn't need to explain it to her. And, there's nothing worse than trying to explain to someone how much pain you're in, and, you have to risk them not understanding or them not even believing you. And it's just like, it's not even worth it. It's like, who wants to be told that their pain isn't real when it's just like crippling, and, like, it's just not worth it to try to explain that, or for someone to just like give a very overly simplistic answer. Oh, you just need to do this and that. Well, no, these things take real work. I mean, they don't just go away. It's not just easy to deal with, right? Anyway, so Vanessa helped me tremendously, and I took a course with her. I studied with her, and I wrote her emails for many years after, many years. And it helped me being in touch with her. It was like she guided me, right? And I went on with my life, and I moved away from Vanessa, but I still kept in touch with her. In 2012, and I've heard this a lot by a lot of people, that like a lot of people say they had very profound experiences in 2012. In 2012, I had a very severe sort of ego death that very much had to do with my trauma. There was a lot of issues, it was a big release, in other words, and it was very difficult, but it was extremely empowering and educational. I learned so much. Like, I just downloaded so much information. It was a huge awakening, spiritual awakening for me, 2012. And that really made me like fully aware of my trauma, of my sadness, of my despair, of the pain. And, from age 28, from studying with Vanessa, I had learned how to focus my consciousness, to bring it inside and to pay attention to it. And I practiced regularly from then on. So I became very adept at turning my energy inwards, turning my focus inwards, and looking at these things. So at 2012, I had released a lot, but it still wasn't gone. There was just a big part of it. And there was a ripening of karma for my spiritual practice. Like, that was many years later. That was I guess 8 years after I initially met Vanessa. So 8 years of practice um, brought some spiritual fruit. In other words, my understanding of myself and the world um, became realized. Like I just understood so much about life and consciousness and myself. Um, I grew tons. Then later, um, my I had a very strange relationship with a woman who had severe mental health problems, which were compounded by pharmaceuticals and possibly other drugs. Um, it was a very difficult situation, very sad situation. An old friend who I'd known a long time just went downhill, and we became involved romantically, and she died. Um, and while we were together, I was really trying to help her a lot, but she also dragged me down. Um, so it was a difficult situation, but one that was probably, karmic, destined to happen, and a huge lesson for me. But that happened, and that taught me a lot. Um, that was several years ago, I guess 2018. Um, and then to bring us up to date, this past winter, 2020, during the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, um, I had been practicing, my spiritual practice all along, and it culminated during the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, where um, it just activated an immense amount of pain in my heart, and I know that's where the trauma was focused. Earlier in 2012, interestingly enough, it was lower. It was in my abdominal region, wrapped in story. So it was very storified, and I worked through that, and then it went into the heart. And I distinctly recall, I remember feeling the energy moving from the gut to the heart, this big mass, this big dark mass of unconsciousness. Interestingly enough. So that conjunction caused a great burning of that pain, that trauma in my heart. It burned it up, and it was extremely painful. One of the most painful things I've ever felt. It brought up so much dark feelings, like feelings of just the darkest, like hatred and guilt and just loathing and dread. And just like you did not want to be around me, and I did not want to be around you at that time, whoever you were. Just believe me, like that was like the experience of hell. That was the experience of just all the dark things, all of them, all at once. And it burned up. And that spraying all my anxiety kind of left me. And incidentally, in June, I started my YouTube channel. I never would have done that before because the anxiety was too great. It really was. Like I would have such intense anxiety. I can't even tell you. Like even just sitting sometimes, like doing nothing alone, my anxiety would just come up, and it would just be so intense, right? And if I was ever put on the spot, forget it. Like it's not going to happen. It's not worth it. It's just awkward, and it's painful for people watching, and it's painful for me. It's just like, no, let's not do that, right? So I had finally, overcame that, and that it's a long time coming because, this past June, I turned 44. So if you can imagine, that is 34 years of carrying around this huge burden of trauma. It's a long time. That's a long training. That's my real education. That's my school. I come from the school of trauma. Okay, so, and finally this spring I can say I graduated, right? That's why I'm making this video. So that's why I can make a video like this. That's why I feel confident that I have something to offer you about how to overcome sadness, because well, let me just define it for you. Now, when I was younger, I sort of understood all these negative emotions as each one being something separate. And then, like, you know, in different theories, they relate to organs, you know, like anger relates to the kidneys, and fear or liver, and fear relates to the kidneys, and so on and so forth. However, in 2012, I learned that all these negative-based emotions are really fear-based, and they're all differentiations of fear. And fear is really a differentiation of the one consciousness. So it really is all one consciousness. All the emotions, whether it's love or fear or hatred or anger or truth, they're all aspects of consciousness. Now, the one consciousness divides itself into two parts. Full consciousness, which is will express itself as love, as truth, as, you know, divine harmony, as intelligence, wisdom, justice, joyousness, authenticity, right? We could go on. It's the higher, it's the full expression of consciousness. It's full light consciousness, self-effulgent, right? It's that stuff, the light. Now, when it's not fully conscious, then it's fear-based. And what that means is that if you go to a store or you go to somebody's house and you steal their something, like something valuable, like you steal, you know, it could be anything, food or money or their jewelry or something like that, and you put it in your pocket, you walk out and they don't catch you, right? That is, that produces a fear-based consciousness, because it's an incomplete cycle, because there's karma involved there. When you have that stolen item, what does that produce within you? You want to hide, you want to lie, you want to avoid that person, you have anxiety, you have something in your subconscious that says, you know, this, I got away with something, like it's not complete, it's an incompletion, there's something unresolved there. And it's complete when you pay for it. Either you get caught, or you give it back, or you pay for it in some way or another. That's the returning of full consciousness. So that's why there's this differentiation between fear-based consciousness and full consciousness. Fear-based consciousness is karma consciousness. It's unpaid for, it's unresolved. And I'm building up to something. I'm getting somewhere with this. So fear-based consciousness has all different sort of permutations. Fear-based consciousness is something that is not fully aware, and it can produce, the rawest form, I call it fear-based consciousness because fear is the rawest form of it, but fear itself doesn't want to be discovered for what it is. Because it's not fully conscious, it doesn't know itself. So it's always guessing. It's always putting on a mask. That's why fear will never admit it's fear. If you go to someone and say, "Are you afraid?" Most likely, They're not going to say they're afraid, even though they are afraid. 99% of the time, that'll happen. People will never admit they're afraid. Why? Because if somebody says I'm afraid, and if somebody is vulnerable enough to show their fear, the fear burns up and they become not afraid anymore, right? But that's not the game of fear. The game of fear is to say, no, I'm not afraid, which is a lie. It's secrecy, it's dishonesty, and it's putting on a mask. This is the nature of the ego, by the way. The ego is a mask. The ego is a make-believe. So fear produces egoic consciousness, which is a mask. The fear doesn't know itself. Fear consciousness doesn't know what it is. Therefore, it's guessing, and it puts on a mask, and it puts on a convincing mask. And if it's not convincing, there's an ego death. And then fear will create an even better mask. It learns from its mistakes, and now it has a new mask, right? And this mask better be good, because if it goes through another ego death, then, well, it's going to have to, create an even better mask, right? But so these masks that we wear, these ego masks, they were like, we walk around like, I'm this, I'm that, because that's the unconscious aspect. That's guessing. We're just guessing. Who am I? I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a this or that, I'm an astrologer, we take on these identities. That's fear. That's fear consciousness. Full consciousness doesn't need to guess. Like, full consciousness says, I am that I am. That's full consciousness. That's when, the enlightened beings will, speak like that. I am that I am, right? Whereas fear consciousness says, I am this or I am that. I am something specific. That's my identity. So anyway, all the negative emotions, whether you're talking about anger or hatred or, the raw form fear or sadness, greed, jealousy, guilt, shame, or sadness. And there's an order. We could put these in order, and we could bring out qualities to each one of these. They're all fear-based, right? And they have different vibrations. Like, some of the heaviest vibrations are like hatred, anger, and rage are sort of in between. Rage can get dark. It can get dark. Lust, what else? Guilt and shame are very dark, very deep and dark. And then they get lighter, in fact. Sadness, in fact, is it's probably the variation of fear consciousness that is closest to becoming full conscious, right? So this is what I want to talk about. But before I get there, I just want to point out that if you have what's called synesthesia, you have already a heads up. You already, there's probably some karmic residue from a past life where you've developed spiritual practices. I have synesthesia. I've had it since I was a child, my whole life, where I can put colors and textures and qualities to any sort of idea, like numbers or letters, or if I go inside myself, I can see with my mind's eye. I can see colors. I can feel the qualities, like temperature, textures, and all that. But so that's extremely helpful. But even if you don't have that, what you need to develop is your ability to turn your attention inwards, right? Meditate. And everyone can do this, because if you have emotions, then you're already, to some extent, aware of it. Your consciousness is aware of these things, and that's what it is. In order to transcend sadness, and I explain all these things because to point out that I've had a lot of sadness. I've had my share of sadness, right? I've had a lot of sadness, a lot of sad days, a lot of days where I was just crying. And I never had an issue with crying, by the way. You know, I've witnessed people who are like, you know, they'll go through something painful and they'll cry and they'll be like, stop crying, stop crying. I'm not a bitch, you know, I'm not a pussy, whatever. Like, that is such a harmful belief. Okay, if you want a miserable life, hold that belief. If you want a painful, miserable life, hold that belief. There's nothing wrong with crying. We are conditioned to believe that sadness is a bad thing. We're conditioned to believe that sadness is something we need to avoid at all costs. You know, if you're sad, run away from that, suppress it, then you'll probably get depressed. And if you're depressed, you can go see a psychiatrist or psychiatrist or whatever, a therapist, who, yeah, psychiatrist, and they'll give you a pill because you're depressed, right? Depression is fear-based consciousness. And it is a more suppressed version of sadness. Right? All these things are fear-based, so, right? So it's just the bundle, put it all in a bundle. All the negative things are fear-based consciousness, which are themselves a differentiation of full consciousness. And if you understand this, you can understand that fear-based consciousness just needs to be made conscious in order for it to become full light consciousness, which is love and truth and joyousness and wholeness and peace, right? So you can turn the most painful things into full, you know, light consciousness, wisdom, you know, truth, love, right? And how you do this is by paying attention to them. It's very literal. It's just plain and simple. Like, how do you make something unconscious conscious or subconscious conscious? I mean, the answer is self-evident, by paying attention to them, by being conscious of them. You know, we don't want to do that. It's painful. Yeah, that's the thing. In order to transcend pain, you have to feel pain. In order to transcend sadness, you have to be sad. You have to feel the sadness, but you don't have to believe the story that the sadness is telling you. That's the trick. And I'm telling you this because I've been through it and I've come out the other end, right? Sadness is not sad. If when you're feeling really sad and you sit there and just willing to turn your attention inward, close your eyes, turn your attention inward and start feeling the sadness with your whole being. And initially, it might be a challenge. Your mind might be fighting you, but just stick with it. Just stick with it, stick with it, stick with it, and keep doing it, and keep doing it, and keep doing it. Feel the sadness and ask yourself, start asking yourself, be curious. Stop believing the thoughts that it's telling you and just look at it objectively, objectify it. What is it? What is that energy? Does it have a color? What color is it? Does it have a temperature? What temperature is it? Does it have a feeling, like a texture? What texture is it? What does it feel like? Describe it, and you can even write it down. Put as many descriptive words as you can about sadness. And you know, you don't have to do it like all at once, like while you're feeling it. Like, you can feel it and just take note, like mental notes. And then later you can write, what is sadness? And stop believing like everything that you've been told. Just like pretend like nobody's ever told you anything about sadness, and you're discovering sadness for the very first time. And write about, what is sadness? I've come across this amazing new thing. I have no idea what it is. What is it? I'm trying to figure it out. What is sadness? And you might discover something amazing. You might discover something really transformative. I don't want to tell you what to experience, but I can tell you that sadness can be beautiful. And sadness can be an experience that is in no way something you want to run away from. Something, it can actually be something enjoyable. Now, this doesn't mean that once you cross over this threshold where you experience sadness, you've given it enough consciousness that it's no longer a problem, that you're never going to be sad again. You can still be sad because sadness is an experience, just like happiness is an experience, just like laughter is an experience, just like joy is an experience, just like it rains outside. And when it rains outside, we don't tell ourselves that this is a miserable experience. Rain happens, and it's not something to resist. So you will still be sad. You know, I'm still sad at times, but sadness is not anything that I want to avoid. I never have to, whenever I feel sadness, I never think like, oh, it's time to go out and get drunk, or oh, I'm sad, therefore I'm entitled to go and binge out on ice cream or this or that or the other. If I want to binge out on ice cream, which I don't usually, if I want to, sadness is not the excuse. There is no excuse. It's just that's what I want to do. But it's cold out, so I don't really like eating cold foods in the cold, you know. But that's, you know, that's the way I am. But I don't need to buy myself off. I don't need to feel like a victim. I don't need to feel entitled to all this and that because I have a day where, or a moment, or a few hours, or however long where I feel sad. I have no resistance to feeling sad or to crying. And in fact, I think it's beautiful. I find it beautiful because I've looked at it and I've come to the conclusion that it's just not anything that I ever want to run away from. And I've had the experience where I've been crying and just been like, in fact, it happens all the time. It's like, it's really nice because I'm not believing anything negative about it. And I'm not running away from it. I'm not trying to hide from it. And it happens, and it's good. It's a release. It's a healthy release. And if you ever have observed a baby, which I'm sure just about everyone has, and why wouldn't you? Why are babies so bright and cheery? And everyone sees a baby and they're like, oh my God, you know, like this and that. That's a reflection of the baby's health because the baby doesn't have this idea that says when I feel sad, when I feel pain, that I shouldn't cry. Babies just cry it out. It's a discharge. You know, it's the equivalent of. In fact, it's so stupid the way humans, the way modern people hold things like sadness. It's the equivalent of thinking that peeing or pooing is bad, right? And so we hold it in. You know how stupid that is? You know how ridiculous that is? Um, I don't like to pee or poo, so I always hold it in. That's so unhealthy. But it's the same thing with sadness. If you're always holding in your sadness and telling yourself like, I can't be sad, I can't cry, I can't feel that. No, I won't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry or all this and that. That's so unhealthy. And it creates mental illness. And it's so bad for you. And it's just such a wrong paradigm. It's a discharge. And you don't have to believe these stupid things that people tell you, like you know, crying is bad, or whatever. Emoting is bad, because then it just compounds, and then you get worse problems. Yeah, you might not feel sad for a while, but you probably can't have natural emotions, and you become depressed, you become angry, you become, you know, it solidifies and crystallizes and turns into heavier and darker negative fear-based emotions, right? And you know, I've gone through that. I've repressed a lot in my life, and I've looked through the layers of myself and found some very dark things. And with my synesthesia, I could really differentiate all the different negative emotions. And I can tell you that sadness, and this is fairly obvious, sadness has the nature of water. It's blue and it's wet and it's fluid And that's why it just comes out with tears. It comes out very easily. That's why it's the closest to the heart, it's the closest expression of a fear-based emotion to full consciousness. That's why sadness is really good. So if you're sad, you should be thankful. And if you're sad, you should just spend time alone being sad. Just cry it out. Don't resist it, because you're fortunate to be sad. Because that's the easiest way to clean yourself out. And if you're not willing to do that, you're really leaning into your ego. You're really feeding your ego. It's an egotistical frame of reference, not willing to experience negative emotions. That's how ego builds itself. You're just building more and more layers of ego. And you're becoming less intelligent with each layer of ego, because you're using up your psychic energy. And that's a topic for another video. Everyone is psychic. I'm going to get into that. And how we become more psychic is by peeling away layers of ego, because ego is a psychic phenomenon, and we're using up our psychic energy, building our ego. But that's another topic. So yeah, it's highly egotistical to repress our negative fear-based emotions. And you cannot be, on the spiritual path. And it's really the human path. I don't want to call it the spiritual path, because it's not like some special, like, here's the normal human path and here's the spiritual path. Nothing like that at all. In fact, this is why we're here. We're here from our soul, from our soul's perspective, to grow. And we create situations in our life for the very purpose of soul growth, and to have our karma cleansed, to resolve our karma, right? To pay for things that we've stolen in the past, so to speak. To resolve the fear-based karma and to increase the full consciousness, right? Full consciousness has no karma attached to it. Fear-based consciousness always has karma attached to it. So ego is, in essence, equals karma equals fear-based consciousness. Those three things are indifferentiated. Last thing I just want to touch on, so the different layers of fear-based consciousness. Sadness is up here, and it has the nature of water. It's blue, it's fluid, it's just like the ocean. It comes out, that's why we cry. As you get deeper, you get depression, which is like ice, And then there's all different, like, I associate it with colors a lot, but also different textures, and like lust is like purple. Anger goes from like bright red to rage, which is like a very dark red. And then things like, hatred is obviously like black, just like black. And guilt and shame are like shades of brown, and very dense and heavy and ugly, very painful, very, very, very uncomfortable. And it's interesting that you might think that like, hatred is the worst, that's the hardest. In fact, I think like the browns are the hardest. Like guilt and shame, they're really, really difficult to face. Really, really distasteful, really ugly, really just repulsive. The experience of diving into guilt, I've found, is the worst. It just doesn't want to be experienced. It just wants to stay there unexperienced. Things like lust have a poisonous quality to them. Anyway, you can experience these things for yourself and figure them out for yourself. But I just want to point out that it can be done. Like, we can dive in to ourselves in our inner world, and we can directly experience all these negativities, and we can make them conscious, and we can transcend them, and we can stop believing the thoughts that they're putting up in our brain. These are not our thoughts, right? These are the other half of these toxic fear-based energies. They're fear-based. And they're not real. If you've had any direct experience with fear, enough experience with fear, the way to transcend fear is to not touch it, not do anything with it, just ignore it. Like, fear can only hurt you if you believe in it, right? So if you're experiencing fear, raw fear, which I have experienced a lot of raw fear, especially in 2012, so I felt like I was swimming in fear, like so much fear just came up. You just have to be neutral. That's the way to move through fear. Just know that it'll burn itself up. Fear itself is a burning up of fear-based consciousness. If the raw experience of fear is experienced, that's already a burning up. You just have to not buy into it. Don't resist it. Don't attach to it. Just be completely neutral. Just know that it can't hurt you and it's going to pass. That's it. Right? So this is how you can transcend any negative emotion, especially sadness. Sadness is the easiest. That's why I titled it Sadness, right? You can start with sadness, transcend sadness, and see really just how beautiful sadness is. And the image, just finally, the image is like if you could hold it in your hand. Like, see if you could hold it in your hand and hold it away from yourself. Like, put that image in your head. Like, when you're looking at your sadness, try and hold it, try and pick it up, hold it, look at it from a little bit of distance, separate from yourself, and just say, what is this? And look at it and get into it. That's the secret. And if you can do that, you can transcend yourself. You can transcend all your negative emotions. You don't need to be dependent on pharmaceutical drugs, or illicit, illegal drugs, or alcohol, or cigarettes, or sex, or any of the vices that we use. Ice cream. Some people use ice cream to dull and numb and escape from our pains and emotions. And I speak from direct experience. I've been doing this for a long time, and this is really my life's work up until this point. This is what I have specialized in more than anything else. I'm also, as you know, an astrologer, but that's actually secondary to really what I've been doing and what I know mostly, which is this: transcending sadness, overcoming trauma. That's really where I've put most of my energy. So, thank you. I hope you found this helpful. I really enjoyed talking about this, and if you have any questions or comments, you can always comment in the comment in the comments, or if you want a reading, you can reach out to me at macrogoldmachine@yahoo.com, or find me on Facebook. That's it. Thank you. Bye.